Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video in the Spigot series. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make an Afk plugin. So this plugin idea was a suggestion by one of my viewers. I'll put the screenshot right on the screen right now for you to see who suggested it. And if you're watching right now, thank you for the idea. It's a great idea. So what we're going to be doing this episode is make an Afk plugin so that when a player is not moving for at least, maybe like a minute or 5 minutes, they enter an Afk mode, to which they are sent a message telling them that they're AFK, and it also tells everyone else on the server that that player is now AFK, okay? And also they can do other things like see if they're AFK with the simple command and also toggle their AFK status, because sometimes you know that you're going to go take a dump, so you may do /AFK to make yourself AFK. And then when you move, you come out of that automatically. So I'm going to walk you through the full process. We're going to make this plugin. If you want to code it alongside me, then go ahead. But as always, I'll leave the code for this video in the description below for you to check out, and so that you can make it better if you want to, or you can just go ahead and read the code to see what I did and all that. So let's get started here. So we're going to make a new Spigot plugin. Okay, so we got the project made now. So let's go ahead and get started here. So the first thing you want to do when you start a new plugin is obviously have a game plan for what you want to do and how you want to do it. So we're going to be making an Afk plugin. So that's pretty simple in terms of what we want to do. And so let's go ahead and write out our game plan. So game plan, I've come up with a few points just before I started recording this. So I think the first thing we need is something simple like creates a new class called Afk Manager. And so this class will be responsible for keeping track of all the data that we're keeping track of, and also giving you methods for you to get information about a player's AFK status and such, okay? So we'll fill that with stuff. And so the second point will be the class has a hash map or other data structure of players and when they last triggered the player move event. So the whole idea behind an Afk plugin is to track whenever a player has not moved for a specific period of time, and when they reach that threshold, they will become AFK. And so we need a way to track when they last moved or when they moved and all that stuff. So that's how we're going to do that, generally speaking. So then we also want to have a task asynchronously running that reports a player as AFK when they have not moved in a while. Okay, so obviously storing the data whenever a player moves, like keeping track of when a player has last moved, is very important. But we also need a continuous piece of code that runs continuously. Continuous run? That didn't make any sense. We need a piece of code that runs continuously to check to see when a player has last moved, and if it reaches that threshold that I talked about, then they're going to be AFK. All right. So an asynchronous task would probably be best in this case because it runs essentially independent from the main plugin thread or the main server thread, however that works. But it's essentially an asynchronous thread that runs independent of the other stuff. Okay. So that's what we're going to do for that. And then the last point is have a way for players to manually become AFK. So a simple command, like I said, that toggles their AFK status manually instead of relying on the server to report them as AFK or set them as AFK. So let's get started here. Let's go ahead and do this, the Afk Manager part of it. Well, first let's just make all our packages. How about that? So commands, listeners, and then we'll have a Java class called Afk Manager. So this is going to be our most important class. I sort of mentioned it before. So this will be responsible for keeping track of all of the players on the server and when they last moved and making them AFK, making them non-AFK, all that stuff. All of the stuff related to this plugin, generally speaking. And so the primary data structure that we're going to use to keep track of players' movements is a hash map. And hopefully you're familiar with a hash map. It's essentially, well, it's a map data structure and it also uses hashing. But essentially, it's just a key value pair type of data structure that has you, let me just write it out first. So private static final hash map. So the key is what you identify it by. So each object or each element in the hash map will have a value, but to get to that value, you need something to identify it by, which is called the key. So each key is just going to be the player. And the reason we can just use a player, not an offline player or a UUID, is because we're only wanting to keep track of online players in the first place, so there's no reason, having to have this support offline players as well. So this should work fine. And then the value stored at each entry will be when they last moved, so that'll be a long. So the long will be the epoch time of when they last moved, or essentially a way of representing time as a number value, okay? And then we need to give this a name. We'll call it last movement, since that's what's going to be tracking the last movement of each player when they last moved. And so also it's called hash map just because it uses hashing, which is a technique to access values really efficiently. You'll learn about that in like, a data structures class or whatever. Now let's just think of some basic methods that we can have within this class that will be helpful for our plugin. So I think that what I want to do is have some listeners. So when the player joins the server, they're going to be added to this hash map automatically. So this hash map will have every single online player and when they last moved. And then when they leave the server, obviously we want to then remove them from the hash map because there's no point in tracking them anymore if they're not on the server. All right, so let's just go ahead and make two methods for that. So public static void player joined. So pass in the player who joined. And so we're going to do last movement dot put, and then the player is the key, so the identifier essentially, and then the value is going to be the current time as a long. So to get the current epoch time, or what the current time is as a long value, you can do system dot current time milliseconds, or millis, whatever. There you go. And also something I didn't mention is why are these static? We're going to change it back to non-static, but the reason I want it as static right now is just for ease of access. It's going to be easier to access these methods and call them if we don't have to make an instance of this class every single time. Now let's make the complements of that. So public static void player left, player. So last movement dot remove player. There we go. So that'll add and remove a player. Now let's make a method that essentially we can call whenever a player moves, because like I said, we're going to have a listener for the player move event. So every time a player moves, we want to update their movement value essentially. So let's make a method for that. So public static void player moved player. So this dot last movement, not this because it's not it's static currently. So last movement dot put, and then player, and then system dot current time milliseconds. Now, just as a note here, these two methods have the same code within it, so they are exactly the same except with different names. But we're going to change this one to add more code to it. But just for now, they are the same. They run the same code. The only difference is that this one runs only when the player joins, and so this means that the current key that you're entering into the hash map does not already exist, so it's being added. But when you call put and the key is already in the hash map, it's just going to edit it or update it rather. So that's really the only difference. But if you want to initially, you could combine these. But like I said, I know that I'm going to add something to this one in a second. Okay, so what we're going to be adding is check to see if the player is still AFK, or check their AFK status. So essentially why I want that is because if a player is currently AFK, they're marked as AFK essentially, and then they move and we update their move time, then we cannot expect them to be AFK anymore, right? So we want to go through the process of, announcing them as no longer AFK if they were AFK a second ago, essentially. But for now, let's go ahead and make some other stuff here. So we're going to make a new command called isAFK. So that's just a simple way for us to debug this plugin and figure out if we're currently AFK or not, or for other players to see if they're AFK for some reason. Not the most useful command, but we're going to have it just for the purpose of making this plugin. So implements command executor, boom, 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 return true. And so first, let's go ahead and see if it's a player. So if sender instance of player p, let's go ahead and change our pom.xml Java version to 17 so that we can use the latest Java features. There we go. Now let's go ahead and check the arguments length so that we know if they're trying to check their AFK status or someone else's AFK status. So if args.length is equal to 0, they want to check theirs. So we're going to check theirs. Otherwise, we want to check someone else's. So player target is equal to bucket.getPlayerExact args 0. And now we need that way to check to see if a player is AFK currently or not, okay? So let's go back to Afk Manager, and let's go ahead and make a new method for that to check to see if a player is AFK or not. So public static boolean for true or false is AFK player player. And now to determine if a player is AFK, we're going to check to see if the long value for their hash map entry is essentially older than a certain amount. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. So this represents the last time they moved in epoch time. All right, so the last time they moved in epoch time milliseconds for Java. So let's go in and get the time that has elapsed between that time and then the current time in milliseconds. All right, so this will be long time elapsed is equal to the current time, so it's system.current time milliseconds minus their entry time. So last movement dot get player. So you're getting the value associated with the player key. This will return a long. So the last time they moved, the difference between the current time and the last time they moved will be the time elapsed in milliseconds. So now we want to see if they have moved since, let's say, 1 minute. So what is 1 minute in milliseconds? That would be 60,000, so 60,000. So if if this value here for time elapsed is equal to or greater than 60,000, this means they have not moved in at least a minute. All right, so that's pretty simple, I think. So if time elapsed is greater than or equal to 60,000, then we can go ahead and return true. Otherwise, return false. And you could combine that all into one return statement here, but we'll just have it like this for clarity. And let's go ahead and take this value here and go ahead and put it up here as a constant. So private final static, or static final, however you want to do it. Private static final movement threshold. We'll say 60,000. And this is a long, like I said, so long. And then usually you want to put an L at the end of it because it's a long. So private static final long movement threshold, it's capital because it's a constant. And then 60,000, so which is 1 minute in milliseconds. So now we'll change this to movement threshold. There we go. And it has to be static or we will not be able to access it within this method here, okay? So now let's go back to AFK is AFK command and let's go ahead and use that. So we'll say if Afk Manager dot is AFK, pass in the target. If that returns true, that means that they are AFK currently. So if that person is AFK, we're going to just tell the person who ran the command that that person is AFK. So we'll do p.sendMessage target.getDisplayName is currently AFK. Otherwise, p.sendMessage target.getDisplayName is not currently AFK. Awesome. Now let's do the same thing for ourselves. So we'll copy this, paste it here, just change some of the variables. So p, and we'll say you is currently AFK. You are currently AFK. There we go. Awesome. So now this should work. So we're checking to see if we're currently AFK. If we are, then we're going to tell ourselves that we are. If instead we're checking to see if someone else is AFK, we're going to tell them whether they're AFK or not using the simple Afk Manager is AFK method and passing in the person that you want to check to see if they're AFK. So that should be it for that. Now let's just go ahead and set up our listener class, by the way. So new Java class Afk listener. So implements listener bucket. So first things first, let's get the join listener. So public void on player join event e, and we'll do Afk Manager dot player joined e dot get player. Now let's do the same thing for when they leave. So event handler public void on player quit event Afk Manager dot player left e dot get player. Import the events. Awesome. So now we need one more event for when they move. So event handler public void on player move event e. So Afk Manager dot player moved and then e dot get player. They're all the same pretty much. Okie dokie. So player joined, player left, and then player moved. And now I have an idea for how to make this better. So let's go back to this part here. We did check to see if the player is still AFK. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to, before we update the player's current movement time, we're going to get the last movement time and store it into a variable so that it's not overridden. So we're going to do, what is it? So we're going to do long last movement time. That's going to be equal to last movement dot get player. So we're storing that, and then we're setting the new value. And then now we want to compare the two values to see, for example, if they were not AFK in the last time, and then they are now AFK in the new time, this means that the player became AFK between those two times. So we want to announce that they are now AFK. And then otherwise, if they were AFK and then they're not AFK anymore in this new time, then they are no longer AFK, and we want to announce that. Otherwise, if they were AFK and then they're still AFK, or if they were not AFK and then they were still not AFK, then we want to just not do anything, right? So we want to check to see if the AFK status of that player was toggled or not, and this is one way to do that. And we can just go ahead and simplify this variable here. So instead of storing the last time, let's just store whether they were AFK or not in the last time. So we'll do boolean was AFK, and that's going to be equal to system dot current time milliseconds minus last movement, the hash map, get player, and if that is greater than or equal to 60,000 or movement threshold, then they were AFK previously. And then now we want to have one for the current AFK status, so current AFK, or just called now AFK. That's going to be the exact same thing. The only difference is that in between these two statements here, we updated it in the hash map, so they may have different values, okay? So first things first, let's see if they were AFK, and then if they're not AFK now, then that means that the AFK status was changed, so we want to announce that fact. So we'll say if was AFK is true, this means that they were AFK, and now AFK is now false, and we're reversing that, so false becomes true essentially. If that status was toggled, this means that they became not AFK anymore. So we want to announce that to the world. So we'll do player.sendMessage, you are no longer AFK. And then we'll also have a to-do here for tell everyone else they are no longer AFK. Okay. Otherwise, else if was AFK was false, this meaning that they were not AFK, and now AFK is now true, this means that they are now AFK, and they were not AFK previously. So player.sendMessage, you are now AFK. So to do, tell everyone else they are now AFK. And we do not need an else statement because the other conditions will just be if they're both the same. In that case, then we don't want to do anything, like I said, because nothing has changed. So we can get rid of this now. There we go. So now we can report when the player has moved, and then whenever they move, we want to see if their AFK status has changed or not. All right. So we're making a lot of progress so far. Hopefully you're sticking with me here and you're understanding what's going on. Before we get to testing this out, let's go ahead and set up the other command just to see if we can get the player able to toggle their AFK status. This will help us test out the plugin. So that's why I want to add this one right away. So public class AFK command implements command executor. Now let's think about the way that we want to do this. So we want obviously a method within Afk Manager that will allow us to toggle the player's AFK status. So let's think about this. So currently this hash map here stores the player and then when they last moved. And so we determine if they're AFK currently if the long here has not been changed in at least 60,000 milliseconds, okay? Now, there isn't really a way for us to manually make it so that a player now appears AFK unless we just put a value that's 60,000 before the current epoch time. That is one way we could do it, or we can do it in a more explicit way by setting this value here to -1. If we set it to -1, this means that the player is manually set to AFK status. So obviously then in that case we'll need to make some basic modifications here. So let's go all the way down to is AFK and just go ahead and cut this out, because if we're going to allow the value to also be -1, then this won't really hold. It will hold, but if it's -1, we need to check for that as well. So we'll just cut this out and do if last movement dot get player. If it's equal to -1L for long, this means that they are in a manual AFK status. So we'll just return true right away. Otherwise, else, we'll paste that back. Then we can check if the time elapsed is, true or false. I mean, greater than the threshold or not, or greater than or equal to the threshold or not. Because there's no point in checking the time elapsed if the value is set to -1L. That's just you don't have to do that calculation if it's set to manual. So hopefully that makes sense. We're checking to see if they're AFK or not by checking to see if the value set for their entry is -1, or if the time elapsed since the current time and the time of their entry is greater than or equal to the movement threshold, then we return true otherwise. So with all that said, now we can just go back up to here and change these as well. But now that I'm looking at this, we don't even need to do the calculation here. We can just use is AFK directly right here. There's no point in having to do all this explicitly when we already have a method for it. Hopefully you noticed that when I was coding this out. So we can just do directly is AFK and then pass in player, and then is AFK, pass in player. There we go. And now let's go ahead and make that toggle method I told you about just a second ago. So we're going to do public static void. Actually, we're going to return a boolean. I'll explain why in a second. Toggle AFK status, and then pass in player. So this method here will be responsible for toggling their AFK status. So if they're currently AFK, then we want to just change their entry time to the current time of milliseconds, because that's the same thing as moving. So that'll do that. But if you're currently not AFK and you want to set yourself to AFK, then we're going to do what we said before, which is change their time entry to -1, which is an indication of manual AFK status. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Oh yeah, and then we're going to return true if they're now AFK or now not AFK. So this will be useful within our AFK command to decide whether we want to tell the player if they're now AFK or now not AFK. So let's just go ahead and show you so you can understand better what I mean. Okay, so first of all, we want to check to see if the player is currently AFK or not. So we'll do if is AFK, pass in player. They're currently AFK, so we want to set them to not AFK. So we'll do last movement, which is our hash map, and then put player, and then system.current time milliseconds. So that will set them as no longer AFK, because they technically just moved artificially. So we'll just return false since they're no longer AFK. And then else, we're going to do last movement dot put player, and then -1L. So the else here will be if is AFK returns false, which means that they're currently not AFK. So that means that we want to make them AFK artificially. So we're going to set the value to -1, and then we'll return true. There we go. So now we can go back to AFK command and do if Afk Manager dot toggle AFK status p. If that's true, if that returns true, this means that they are now AFK. They weren't AFK, but now they're AFK. So we'll do player or p dot send message. You are now AFK. Otherwise, we're going to do p dot send message. You are no longer AFK. And then we're also going to do announce to everyone else. Okay. All right, simple enough. So hopefully you understand what's going on here now. We just made some slight modifications to our AFK manager to allow for a player to manually toggle their AFK status. So if it's -1, this means that they're currently AFK, or if the time elapsed based on that amount is greater than or equal to 60,000 or whatever value is here, they are currently AFK. And so in our AFK command, we're just going to run toggle AFK status to flip whether they're AFK or not, return true if they're AFK, return false if they're not AFK, and then we'll send them a message telling them their new AFK status. Okay, so let's go ahead and test all of this code out. I'll be surprised if this works on the first try, but we'll find out. But first, obviously, we need to register everything to make sure that it's actually going to run. Okie dokie. So if this all works, the next step will be to have an asynchronous task that checks the player's AFK status every once in a while, and does all that stuff. So we'll see that in a second. But let's go ahead and test this out now. So I'm going to throw this on a server, and I'll be right back. Oh no. So it looks like I updated my version of Java today on my computer, the runtime environment, and so it reset my Java version to 1.8. So I'm just going to take this time to show you how you can change yours back to Java 17, the JDK number. So let's just go to environmental variables, go to, go to path, open that up, and then essentially when you install Java or updated Java, it's going to put this here. So Oracle Java path, just remove that because that will override your setting here of JDK 17/bin or whatever version of Java you want to actually use day to day for development purposes and whatnot. So click OK, and then click OK, and then now restart your terminal. And now you have Java 17 for me at least. So there you go. That's how you can update that or fix that. Anyway, so let's go ahead and run the server now. Okie dokie, I'm on the server with the plugin. Let's go ahead and start testing it out. So first clear my inventory, and then we're going to do /isAFK, and it says you are not currently AFK. Okay. Try it again. Still not AFK. Cool. So what we want to do now is see if we can toggle our AFK status to see if it sets us as AFK. So we'll do /AFK, and it says you are now AFK. And then when we move, it should tell us that we're no longer AFK, and it does. Awesome. So essentially, whenever we did /AFK, it put us as -1, and then when we moved, it set us back to the current time in milliseconds, and then it automatically checked to see if it was flipped or not, and then it reported it when it was flipped. So that works. That part of it works. Let's try again. So /AFK, and let's try un-AFKing ourselves by running the command, and it says you are no longer AFK. Awesome. So everything works so far. Okie dokie, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end this episode here. We're going to split this Afk Manager plugin into multiple parts so that the videos are more digestible. So hopefully it's not too many parts, like maybe 2 or 3. So if you want to see that next part, then hit that like button and I'll release it as soon as possible. But hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial so far. Hopefully you find this interesting and you're able to use this to test your skills out and get more experience. So in this episode, we just created the basic /AFK command with basic AFK functionality, along with an isAFK command to see if you're AFK or someone else is AFK. In the next episode, we're going to start with the task that checks to see if players are AFK or not. Alright, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In the description below, I'll leave a link to the code for this episode so you can check it out. You can bookmark it, come back to it later. If you forget any concepts or you just want to review the concepts I taught in this video, I'll mark everything up with comments so you can come back and read the code without having to rewatch the video, although your reviews are greatly appreciated. So yeah, I'll leave a link for that in the description below, so make sure to check it out. And another thing is I'll leave a link to our Discord server. It's a big community for programmers, so you can ask for help on your programming projects if you're stuck on something, or maybe you can get some new friends. If you don't have any friends, there's lots of people here. It's growing really fast. You can find lots of people who are passionate about the same things as you. For example, if you like Minecraft Spigot development, you can find lots of people who like that. If you like C++, if you like Java, if you like web development, it's a really, really big programming community. So feel free to join. There's a link for that in the description below. And the last thing I want to tell you is that if you want to support this channel, you can click the join button below this video and you can join this channel as a member for as low as 99 cents a month, and you can cancel at any time. You get some cool perks like early access to all of my new videos, a cool rank on my Discord server like you see right here on the side, YouTube members, and also you get to see yourself on the screen like you see right now. So if that sounds cool to you, feel free to join. If you don't want to, that's fine. If you can't, that's okay too. I really just appreciate you watching the video anyway. And thank you. Thanks a lot. And that's it. So if you like this video, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And peace.